The authentic origin of man. Tonight, my friends, we will begin our meeting talking precisely about man's enigma, something that is necessary to know in order to have a better knowledge of ourselves. It is necessary to know the origin of man, from where he comes, and what is the fundamental reason of his existence. Much more has been said about man, but it is necessary to investigate it in a more profound way. There actually lives on Earth a population of about 4.5 billion people. Obviously, these people are the Aryan race. Our continents are densely populated. Europe, America, Asia, Africa, and Oceania are the 5 continents on which humanity lives. If we ask, what is the origin of this humanity? Where did it come from? Do you think this humanity that lives on these 5 continents did originate in them? Human traces were found in the caves of Grimaldi, and there has been an effort to reconstruct the history or the prehistory of the races of Grimaldi and Cro-Magnon. Skeletons of giants have been found in different places. In Brazil, a figure or human skeleton of about 6 or 7 meters height was found. Also, skeletons of human beings that look just like gorillas, orangutans, or something like that have been found especially in the caves of Cro-Magnon. From all of that, it has been mistakenly deduced that possibly the human race originated from the apes or monkeys. Darwin's theory was very celebrated in his era, and it was thought that man came from the apes. This mystery worries our humanity, and from time to time someone tries to figure out if man comes from the ape, or the ape came from the man, who came from whom. In some epochs this controversy calmed down, in others it re-emerged again. A pseudo-scientist, a kind of pampered child, had the idea that the human race descended from the savages. That is what he said. And of course, in the end, this did not resolve anything. Who came from whom? I do not think that all the population of 4.5 billion that actually live in the world came from these 5 continents, because the world has changed its aspect many times. Before it had the aspect that you observe on a map, its physiognomy was different. There are older maps. There exist different maps that have been found in different parts of the world in which the physiognomy of Earth appears different. Earth did not always have the same continents, the same physiognomy. In older times, it had a different aspect. What today are the poles was the equator, and what today is equator were the poles. Then, the actual continents did not exist, or existed only partly. It was emerging from the bottom of the oceans, and there was a densely populated continent that was located in the Atlantic Ocean. Therefore, the physiognomy of the planet was different. I cannot believe, no matter what, that the origin of the human race is in the actual continents. When the human race unfolded in the ancient Atlantis, it was very different. The apes, or the type of men-apes found in the caves of Cro-Magnon and Grimaldi and other caves, in reality belong to degenerated descendants, to degenerations of the Atlantean race. I say this as there exists evolution in plants and also involution, as exists the evolution in animals and also involution, or in the human beings, etc. There also has to exist the evolution and involution in the civilizations. For example, when one speaks with some tribes located on the western or eastern hemisphere, one understands that they have in their past huge civilizations, that they have or preserve in their memory legends that are related with their ancestors, already disappeared, and from very ancient civilizations, and that they speak about them with a lot of respect. Even the cannibals that look so primitive have great traditions. They preserve traditions of immemorial times, of huge cities, etc., etc., etc. Therefore, they are not primitives, they are just degenerates. Some very cruel, bloodthirsty, and savage tribes are involutions, or descendants of ancient civilizations. It is hard to find really primitive people today, and it is because the human race evolves and also falls into involution. I repeat, before these 5 continents existed, there existed Atlantis. Today we are fascinated with modern civilization. It is a wonder to us. Its space machines that travel to the moon or to Jupiter or Venus. Its atomic experiments surprise us. The physiological investigations, the study of living cells, etc. We are so fascinated with these experiments that we really believe that this is the most powerful civilization to have existed in the world. We have fallen in a kind of geocentrism. I say this because in other times, in the Middle Ages, you know very well that people used to believe that all the stars were in movement around the Earth. Well, we have fallen again into a kind of geocentrism when we believe that the history of the world has to move around our much applauded civilization. I think that it is necessary for a kind of modern geocentrism, a new Newton that could be able to demonstrate that our much applauded civilization is just one of the many civilizations that have existed on the planet Earth. The day will come when it will be possible to prove all of this. There are systems that make possible the verification of the fact that before our civilization that looks so bright, there existed a more powerful civilization. Well, I want to point now in emphatic form to the Akashic archives of nature, the memory of nature. The experiments with the carbon-14, for example, have demonstrated that Moon is older than the Earth. We can also demonstrate that there are systems that make it possible to read the memories of nature. The Akashic archives are a reality. I do not deny that one day the scientists will find them. We, the Gnostics, have methods that make it possible to study the Akashic archives of nature. The one that wants to study those Akashic archives will have to develop in an extraordinary form the lotus of 1,000 petals that is related with the pineal gland, Sahasrara chakra, and the latent powers that exist in the pituitary gland, the lotus of the 2 petals and 96 radiations. These 2 small glands are extraordinary. Once they are developed, they bring access to the ultra, to the extrasensorial perceptions, and also to the Akashic archives of nature. When one studies the Akashic archives of nature, one can watch them as a living movie, and in them all the history of Earth and its races. The wise men that have studied the Akashic archives know that Atlantis was real, that it was a huge continent spreading from south to north. This gigantic continent was the stage of the race that existed before us. I am talking about the great Atlantean race, that was a race of giants. That is why the ancient legends talk about Briareus, the one with 100 arms, a race of real cyclops. That race had a powerful civilization, millions of times more powerful than ours. About transplants, they transplanted organs of any type, liver, kidneys, heart, and they even did transplants of brains. That was formidable. In the field of the nuclear physics, they attained the massive atomic illumination. All the cities used the atomic illumination. The farms, their houses, were illuminated using nuclear energy. In the field of mechanics, I can say that their cars were not only amphibious, but could also fly and were propelled by nuclear energy. They extracted the energy not only from uranium and radium, but also from many other metals and vegetables that also were cheaper. In the navigation area, they had better travels to the moon than the ones that Syrians and Trojans are doing now. They had amazing atomic spaceships in which they traveled to the moon, and not only did those astronauts descend to the moon, they also used to go to any planet of the solar system. Therefore, we do not even approach them with our much applauded civilization and pseudo-modern wisdom. About anatomy and biology, they made discoveries that we do not even remotely suspect. Katie King, Katabel, the one of the sad destinies, an Atlantean queen, could live, and with all her youth, during thousands of years. Unfortunately, and this is how the decadency of the Atlantean civilization began, she established a cannibalism really unfortunate. Then girls, young men, etc. were sacrificed to the gods. The cadavers, any young sacrificed cadaver, was transported to the laboratory where the glands that the famous Katabel, the one of the sad destinies, needed, were removed and used to replace her already wasted glands. But not only did they remove the physical glands from those cadavers, no. Today, the famous scientists are so degenerated that they do not know how to manage the principles of life. The Atlantean wise men knew how to use the vital principles of the endocrine glands. They did not ignore that the vibrations of the ether, or better to say, the tattvas, enter into the endocrine glands, the small micro-laboratories that produce hormones, and they never exit. They knew how to use those tattvas, or vibrations of the universal ether. When a gland was transplanted to Katabel, at the same time they were using the tattvas. This is why those scientists were absolutely superior to the modern endocrinologists that do not know anything about this, that ignore the existence of the tattvas because they never even tried to study Ramaphosa or Dr. Krum Heller. There existed a marvelous Atlantean university. I want to speak in emphatic terms about the Akaldana Society, a true university of wise men. They studied the law of the eternal Heptaparaparshinak, the law of seven. They learned how to concentrate the solar rays and make them pass through different chambers. They knew how to transform the 7 colors of the solar prism, how to get the positive, that is to say, the slide of the solar prism rays. One thing is to see the 7 colors of the prism, and another is to transform them into a positive form, to get the positive. The modern scientists have studied the 7 fundamental colors of the solar prism, but they have not obtained the slide of those 7 colors. The Atlantean wise men knew how to get the real positive from the 7 colors of the solar prism, and with that positive of the 7 colors, they made real prodigies. I remember the case of 2 Chinese wise men that made experiments in the Atlantean style with the 7 colors of the solar prism. They extracted the positive from the 7 colors. For example, they put opium in front of a red ray, and then they saw how the opium was transformed into other substances. They put a piece of bamboo and saturated it with a certain substance of blue color, using the positive part of the solar prism, and then they saw how that bamboo was intensely dyed with that blue color. They passed, for example, the sound of the notes, do, or re, or mi, in combination with a determinate color, and then they saw how the note had transformed the color, transformed it into a completely different color. The 7 rays were used in their positive form, and they made prodigies in the Atlantean continent. The law of the eternal Heptaparaparshinak, the law of 7, was profoundly studied. A wise man put the milk of a nanny goat and mixed it with the resin of pine on a plate of marble. He later saw that after its decomposition, the substance had formed 7 different layers. This experiment induced the study of the law of the eternal Heptaparaparshuak, the law of 7. The Atlanteans attained extraordinary things in the field of science. They were scientists and magicians at the same time. They could make a robot that had the intelligent principle of a vegetable or animal, the elemental, and that principle made the functions of the soul or spirit in the robot. So those robots were real alive creatures that obeyed their masters and lords. That Atlantean race existed before the actual human race. They had huge cities, but unfortunately they degenerated. They made the atomic bomb and even more deadly arms, and in the war, entire cities were devastated. Many cities were converted into holocausts, atomic holocausts. If we believe that we are the most wise men in the entire universe, we are absolutely wrong, because before us there has existed a more powerful race, more civilized, more cultured. In reality, in comparison to them, we look like barbarians, uncivilized and uncultured. It is unfortunate that Atlantis had degenerated, and it is because all races are born, they grow, develop, and die. In the Atlantean decadency, horrible things happened. The humanity degenerated, obviously in the vices, in the homosexuality, in the lesbianism, in the drugs, etc., etc. Everything was abused in the time of the degeneration, and obviously that race had to be destroyed. Did that humanity have 7 sub-races? Nobody can deny that, but in the end, they degenerated. The wise men of the Akaldana Society made notable experiments. They were the first to use the Sphinx that was put in front of the university. Much later, when the wise men of the Akaldana Society understood that a great catastrophe was coming, they emigrated to a small continent called Grebanxi, Africa. Later, the new lands that emerged from the bottom of the oceans made this continent bigger. In the beginning, the members of the Akaldana Society went to the south of Africa. After, they emigrated to Cairona, today Cairo City. In the land of Nivea, Nile, or Egypt, they established their famous universities and the Sphinx in front of it. The claws of the lion in the Sphinx represent the fire. The head represents the water. The feet of the bull represent the earth element. The wings represent the air element. 4 are the necessary virtues to achieve the inner self-realization of the being. One has to have the courage of a lion, the intelligence of a man, the wings of a spirit, and the tenacity of a bull. Only in this form is it possible to achieve the inner self-realization of the being. The Akaldana Society in Cairona, today Cairo City, established a temple of astrology. Then the stars were studied not with telescopes as today, but with the 6th sense. When the pyramids are examined, especially the Great Pyramid, it is possible to see a kind of tube, some canals that go from the bottom, from the profound underground sepulchre, to the upper part, to the superior part of the pyramid. Much has been thought or said about those canals, but in reality, those canals were telescopes, and the observatory was not in the upper part, but underground, in the bottom of the sepulchre. There they used to put a receptacle with water, and on a predetermined day, when it was known that a star would be visible, it was reflected in the water. The adepts of astrology used to observe in the water the studied star, not only with the physical faculties, but also with the psychic ones. Instead of observing the sky, they observed the water, and there, in the water, with the 6th sense, they studied them. The brothers of the Akaldana Society, the great wise men, were very good astrologers. When a child was born, immediately a horoscope was done. Not horoscopes in the modern style, not conventional horoscopes. No, that was very different. The wise astrologers observed the stars directly with procedures that today are unknown. They were able to read the horoscopes of the children, and in their prophecies and calculations, obviously they never failed. Children were married since newborn. It was already known who was going to be her wife, and the man in his time and hour was informed of who was going to be his wife. When they reached adulthood, they were married. The citizens were oriented with mathematical precision under the direction of those astrologers in their skill or profession. They knew what any citizen was born for, what each man was useful for, because each man is useful for something. What mattered is to know what a man was useful for, and those wise men knew the skill of each creature that was born. The wise men of the Akaldana society never failed. They moved out of Atlantis before the earthquakes and tidal waves would shake the continent. They moved in time because they knew very well that the end was near. Of course, when the revolution of the Earth's axis came, when the poles were transformed into the equator and the equator into the poles, when it was almost near the time when that continent had to be submerged to the bottom of the dark ocean, the Atlanteans were already warned. It was then when the splendidly dressed crowds went to the temples. One of those was the Ramu's temple. Wearing jewels, the women and the men dressing in splendid form cried out saying, "Ramu, save us!" In the end, Ramu appeared on the altar. These crowds that were crying said to him, "Save us!" Ramu answered, "You will die with your women and children, with your riches and slaves. I had warned you. And as you are going to die, in the same form, a new civilization will surge in the new lands," indicating our Aryan race. "And if they behave as you did, they will also die. It is necessary to know that it is more important to give than receive." Well, the word of Ramu was of no use. It is said that the smoke and the flames suffocated his last words. Atlantis was submerged with all its millions of inhabitants. Today, entire palaces are in the bottom of the ocean and are the habitat of seals and fish. Entire cities are submerged in the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. The gigantic continent, bigger than all America, from Canada to Chile and Argentina, disappeared. A huge continent with a powerful civilization. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, we do not have anything special. The actual civilization is not the first and will not be the last. It is not the highest one and will not be the most extraordinary. Until now, it has been the poorest, the most degenerate. Can we actually conquer space? Are we able to travel in atomic spaceships to Mars, Mercury, or Venus? Is there a project? Yes, there can exist beautiful projects, but actually, are we doing it now? Regarding the transplants, is it already possible to transplant brains? Are we already able to create robots with intelligent principles? There is nothing of that. There is no reason to believe that we are the most powerful. This much applauded modern civilization, with its vulgar generation, will disappear and will not even remain the stones. The great Babylon, the mother of all fornications and abominations of earth, will be destroyed soon. We feel great with our supersonic planes, and we believe that we are the masters of creation. But soon nothing will remain, absolutely nothing of this perverse civilization of vipers. So before the existence of this race that lives on these 5 continents, there existed the Atlantean race. Descendants of Atlantis are the Mayans. The Mayans emigrated to Tibet, Egypt, and Central America. It looks incredible, but even now, the Mayan language is still spoken in Tibet, and it is a sacred ritual language in that country. Let us remember that the Naga and Mayan languages are very similar. Jesus of Nazareth learned Mayan in Tibet. That sentence of Jesus, "Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani," "Lord, Lord," some say, "How you have glorified me," and others say, "Lord, Lord, why have you forsaken me?" Well, that is not a Hebrew phrase. That is why when the Jews listened to Christ saying, "Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani," they said to themselves, "This man calls for Elijah to come and save him." But any small Indian of Yucatan and Guatemala can translate the sentence, "Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani," because it is Mayan and not Hebrew. That is why the Jews did not understand it, and it means, according to the Mayans and their translation, "I hide myself in the pre-dawn of your existence." It is a Mayan ritual sentence. The Turanians were also survivors of Atlantis. Unfortunately, they were devoted to black magic. They also reached Tibet, as other descendants did, like the selected Aryans, and emigrated in the direction of ancient Persia. The Great Law finally defeated them, and they were destroyed. The Redskins are descendants of Atlantis, our ancestors. The ancient Nahuatls, Zapotecs, Toltecs, etc., came originally from Atlantis. Almost all the tribes of America descend from Atlantis. When one advances in these studies, one understands that our actual race did not have its origin, as many believe, on the continents on which we live. One understands that one comes from another race, from Atlantis. One does not come from the apes, orangutans, monkeys, as mistakenly Mr. Darwin and his followers believe. One descended, I repeat, from the Atlantean race, and that is clear. However, the Atlanteans, with all their powerful civilizations, did not descend from the Atlantean continent. Atlantis, with all its powerful civilizations, was magnificent, but the Atlanteans do not descend from Atlantis. They descend from Lemuria. Lemuria was even older than the Atlantean continent. The Lemurians lived on a continent that existed in the Pacific Ocean. It was a continent that existed in that furious sea, a huge continent that covered almost all the Pacific area, bigger than Atlantis, bigger than Europe, bigger than Asia. Obviously, the Lemurian civilization was powerful. The Lemurians were a race of giants, of cyclops. Their height was about 4, 5, or 6 meters. They were giants. It was the race of the giants. Lemuria had a powerful civilization, huge, formidable. In Lemuria, enormous cities were built, cyclopean, surrounded with stone walls and lava of volcanoes. Like now, many people also lived in the country. In the beginning, in the pre-Lemurian era, we could say that there existed a race of hermaphrodites, of Lemurian hermaphrodites. The division into different sexes was in the post-Lemurian era. Therefore, we can divide Lemuria in 2 halves or times. First part, existence of hermaphrodites. Second, division of the race in 2 sexes. Let us observe that human race. In the beginning, there did not exist separate sexes. The race was hermaphrodite. Then, each sacred Lemurian had the sexual organs, masculine and feminine, totally developed, and reproduction was made through the system of gemmation. The hermaphrodite detached from its ovaries naturally, through menstruation at a specific time, an ovule or egg, perfectly developed, of the size of a chicken egg, with its calcareous shell. That egg, once put in a special environment, gestated a new creature in its interior. In the end, when that creature was out of the shell, it was nourished at the breasts of the father-mother. That is how the Lemurians used to reproduce themselves. The sexual act did not exist because each individual was complete. Reproduction was through the gemmation system. However, it happened that when the post-Lemurian era came, it was seen clearly that some children were born with a sexual organ more accentuated than the others. Some were born with the masculine organ more developed than the feminine, or vice versa. And that process became more and more notorious, to the point that finally unisexual children, man and woman, were born. But this process of division into different sexes was made through millions of years. It was not from one day to another. That is why it is said that Eve was taken from one of the ribs of Adam. It is a symbol to represent the division in different sexes. When the total division of sexes appeared, then, in order to create, it was necessary to have cooperation. The menstruation remained in the feminine sex, but that ovule was unfertilized. It was then necessary to have the cooperation of the masculine sex to fertilize the ovule to reproduce the species. The creators, Elohim, the Kumaras, used to meet the people for the reproduction in predetermined times of the year. It was amazing how those races, those tribes, used to travel from one point to another in order to go to the temples in which they would have to reproduce themselves. The sexual act was never done out of the temple. That sacrament was only done in the temple. It was a sacrament of the temple, and the couples, man and woman, in the paved courtyards were sexually connected in order to procreate under the direction of the Kumaras. Humanity enjoyed spiritual faculties. They could perceive perfectly all the wonders of nature and the cosmos. Their capacity of vision allowed them to see half of a holtopomnus, half of the tones of the universal color. We well know that a holtopomnus has 5 million and a half of tones of color. The hearing was sensible. They could listen to the symphonies of the universe. Their sense of smell was so sensitive that it was more acute than that of today. They were a humanity that could use in their alphabet 51 vowels and 300 consonants. The power of the word, of the verb, was not degenerated. Their language was the universal language that had power over fire, over air, over the waters and the earth. It was a superior humanity, millions of times superior to ours. They made powerful civilizations and also knew how to use the energy of the atom and cosmic rays. They had spaceships in which they traveled throughout infinite space, marvelous spaceships. Any human being in Lemuria could live from 12 to 15 centuries, something more than 1,000 years. It was a strong race, vigorous. They could easily take a stone and throw it far away, a stone that today, in order to move, would need a strong crane, and maybe even with the crane we would not be able to move it. The Lemurians were a vigorous race, very strong. However, their origin was not in the Pacific, as it is believed. The Lemurian ancestors were from the Hyperborean continent, that curved, closed around the North and South Pole. In the Hyperborean continent, there existed a powerful race of androgynous, not hermaphrodites, androgynous. It was not a race that was only limited to the terrestrial layer as the Lemurian race. No, the Hyperboreans were different. They floated in the atmosphere of those days. However, they created their own civilization. Many have believed that they never knew war, but as a matter of fact, there existed a race of Hyperboreans that had wars. Then the mineral, vegetable, animal, and human kingdoms were very mixed. There were mineral vegetables and vegetable minerals, animal vegetaloids and vegetaloid animals. About the human beings, they were totally androgynous. They could elongate their body voluntarily and to a greater height or reduce themselves to a mathematic point. The Hyperboreans reproduced themselves as do corals by sprouting. We know very well that there are plants that can reproduce themselves by simple sprouting. A sprout germinates, and this grows and develops. In the same form, in those bodies, a sprout could be born that later was separated and became a creature that was fed by the father-mother. It was a race of very fighting, tall, and thin beings. They protected themselves with big shields and lances, and they used to fight with other tribes. The Hyperboreans lived in a very different era of the world's history. They had the spiritual vision totally developed, and their pineal gland was protuberant, which let them see the ultra of everything. If we think that a plant is the physical body of a vegetable elemental, then this means that each plant has a soul, and that the soul of each plant is a vegetable elemental. The Hyperboreans did not observe a forest like we do today as a group of trees or something like that. To them, that forest was a forest of giants, with big arms, as Briareus, the one with 100 arms, moving from right to left. That forest was not something in silence. They could listen everywhere to the voices of the colossus or giants, of the elementals of the gigantic trees. That was another form for observing things, not like now with this miserable sight that we have that only perceives the physical things. It was the sight that allowed them to perceive the superior dimensions of nature and cosmos. It was searching, omniscient. With that sight, we could see Earth as it is, and not as it apparently is, not as we observe it now. They had superior wisdom and knowledge, more than what we have now. All that we know now is only good to organize the intellect a little bit, and that is it. The Hyperboreans were more wise and were governed by the Superman for the supermen of all times and ages. They had kingdoms and civilizations, but their racial origin was not in the Hyperborean continent either. They knew that their ancestors were back further in time. The Hyperboreans' ancestors were the protoplasmic men, the polar men, the glacial men of the first race that lived in the North Polar region. One cannot avoid laughing at Haeckel's protoplasm theory and his followers that believe that life comes from it in accordance with the unbreakable dogma of evolution, which is also accepted by Darwin and his followers. It is also not the protoplasm of some other authors that was floating in the ocean. No, let us think of the protoplasmic man. Let us think of the protoplasmatic race that existed in the sacred island, the first island, and the one that will be the last to disappear. I am referring to the Nordic land, the land of crystal, as our ancestors of Anahuac called it, the remote Thule, the continent that now is covered by the ice of the North Pole. In that era, that continent was located in the equatorial zone of the Earth because the Earth's position was different. The actual equator was pole, and the poles were the equator. It had huge and profound forests, and the gigantic polar civilization was created in it. The Earth had a magnificent blue color, really beautiful. The mountains were as transparent as the crystal. The human race reproduced itself with the system that we still know in our organism, in the blood, cellular division. We know very well that the germinal cell is divided in two, and the 9 months gestation process begins. The germinal cell is divided in two, the two are divided in four, the four in 8, and in that form starts the process of gestation, through cellular division. Even now, that process still exists in our organism. Why does it exist? Because it existed, and the polar men reproduced themselves with that process. At a certain time, the father-mother organism was divided into two, as the cell divides itself, and in that way reproduction was performed. When a creature was born, it was celebrated as a great event. The Hierophants had meetings in the temples in order to work with the elements of nature, and the esoteric symbols were used in different forms to indicate to us that life was in process of materializing in the physical. The men of the polar era could stretch or reduce their bodies to a mathematical point voluntarily. They were androgynous, and as soon as they could express in themselves the feminine aspect and resemble as beautiful ladies, they could submerge themselves to express the masculine aspect. They were authentic, divine androgynous. Their imagination reflected the starry firmament. They spoke the word of gold that like a river flows under the thick jungle of the sun. Then Uriel, great master from Venus, taught the arts and the science. Uriel left a book written with runes, a book that was studied by the men of the polar race of the first era. All of that is written in the Akashic archives of nature. If you develop the epiphysis and the hypophysis with those couple of small glands and a proper concentration, you will be able to study by yourselves what I am saying.
What is the origin of the polar race? The men of the first race knew quite well that they had evolved in a previous era, or that they had lived in a superior dimension, in the fourth dimension. They knew that there they had lived and known the mysteries of the universe. The men of the fourth dimension did not ignore that they had come from the fifth dimension, and the men of the fifth dimension did not ignore that they had come from the sixth dimension, and also the men of the sixth dimension never doubted that they had unfolded from the primitive original seed. Therefore, the elemental seed, atomic, primitive, of the human race existed before the universe's existence. It was from among the chaos. The seeds of the human race, of the vegetable elements and animal species, were among the chaos. Before the universe existed, those seeds were asleep in the chaos. When the universe was shaken with the Word, when the Creator Word of the first moment put in movement all the atoms, those seeds surged from among the chaos. They had their first manifestation in the seventh dimension, crystallized and developed a bit more in the sixth, then in the fifth, later in the fourth, and the day came when those seeds appeared, already with some development, on our planet Earth, on the protoplasmic Earth, as simple living protoplasms. The human race came from the chaos, evolved in the chaos, and was unfolded in the chaos. One day, the human organisms will return to the seminal primitive state and will come back to the chaos. From the chaos came, and to the chaos will return. One day, our planet Earth was a protoplasm. Later, it will be a cadaver, a new moon, after the seventh race. Then life will exist in the superior spheres and will return to the chaos, because from the chaos came and to the chaos it will have to return. Those who heard my conference tonight, those that would like to ask a question, can do it with absolute freedom. Master, could you say something about the genus science? We have already talked last night about the genus science. Today I will not speak about it because at this moment we are speaking exclusively about Gnostic anthropology. Does somebody have something else to ask? In that chaos that you mentioned, did the eyes start their gestation? The eyes do not have any relation with the chaos. They are a diabolical creation of our errors here and now. The chaos is the chaos, and the reason for its existence is the chaos itself. The chaos is sacred. There are the latent seeds of life. There they developed and from there evolve and later descend from dimension to finally appear here in a concrete form. This is it. Some other question. Master, I would like to know if there is some written documentation about the conference that we just listened to. I wrote a Christmas message, 1968-1969, in which I talk about that. I will try to send you that Christmas message. However, there are other authors that have explained many aspects of anthropogenesis. I can specially recommend the second volume of The Secret Doctrine, entitled Anthropogenesis, whose author is Mistress H.P. Blavatsky. Also, Rudolf Steiner, for example, in his treatise of the occult science, clarified many aspects about that. I can speak to you about this because what I'm explaining is something that I have lived. I do not need to study it in order to explain it. I have lived it, and I have not explained the entire topic, something that I would like, because we would have to stay here all night. Not even in 1,000 nights could I explain all the development of this universe since it emerged from chaos. In any case, I have lived it, and I know it by direct experimentation. Does somebody has something else to ask? Some authors speak about the chaos and the cosmos. Are there differences between both? Undoubtedly, through the law of three, through the holy triamazikamno, it is possible for the creation of new unities. When the three forces, positive, negative, and neutral, coincide in a common point, there appears a new creation. It would not be possible for the creation of any cosmic unity without the conjunction of those three forces that make up by themselves the holy triamazikamno. Those three forces are the holy affirmation, the holy denial, and the holy conciliation. However, to create it is one thing, and to organize it is another. It is possible to create, but if there is not any organization, what could the creation itself be worth?
For a cosmos that in parentheses means order of world, to emerge, to crystallize, it is necessary to have another law. I want to refer in an emphatic manner to the law of the eternal heptaparapashina, the law of seven. Through the law of the holy Triamazikamno, creation is done, but through the law of seven there is established the organization of what has been created, in the form of a cosmos. Therefore, our solar system exists because of two laws. First, the holy Triamazikamno. Second, the eternal Heptaparaparshinach. Thanks to these two laws, our solar system and planet Earth can exist. From the chaos emerged a cosmos, and from the chaos emerged all the cosmoses. So from the darkness emanates the light. Another question? Well, if there are not more questions, we have completed this talk. Inferential peace. Samael Aun Weor.